Hey guys, it's time for a little stories. We talk more about collecting these simulation games and some of the old cards. So I do have a story for you. Back in probably 1997, 1998 or so, I was in my early teens. I remember going with my dad over to a KB Toys outlet in a strip mall somewhere in the Salt Lake Valley area. And we were sort of hanging out there. We're looking at the toy store, and we were suddenly surprised to see a whole bunch of boxes, sealed boxes of the APBA baseball game. And it was really, really interesting to us. We were wondering, should we buy one of these? Because we already had a copy of the game, and it's like, well, if we buy this, are we taking away the ability of somebody else to discover this? But then we're interested to see, how is it packed and how are they sending cards these days and all this stuff. We ended up buying one in the end. And I think I bought it. I think it was on sale for like $10 or maybe even less than that. So the way that this worked, those of you who remember APBA who stuck around during the years after the death of J. Richard Seitz may remember this. APBA decided that it wanted to go after a younger crowd, and so they decided to sort of fancy up the boards a little bit. They wanted to make them colorful. They wanted to change the way that the results read so it was more like a broadcaster sort of reading off a script or something like that, instead of just saying home run to left field, home run to right field, which is what most of us are used to. And anyway, and then they decided to start selling these cards in these boxes in retail stores, and that was what we had purchased. We had purchased sort of the remnants of this, some of the cards that didn't wind up selling. So there's a lot of backstory behind this that we're going to get into as we move along, especially on the blog. Part of the backstory is the fact that Strat-O-Matic originally sold its cards in the same way in retail stores, usually with, a handful of teams, maybe like baseball playoff teams or something like that. And that's what this was. If I remember right, these included the teams that would have been in the 1994 playoffs. So it was all copyright 1995 APBA. And it came with a certificate of authenticity as well that told you that it was part of a limited edition of 15,000 games. So as you can imagine, and as I told you yesterday, that means it's not really limited at all. As it turns out, it really wasn't limited at all. In fact, you can find these things all over the place. And I'm going to show you something that might be interesting to you, just in case you're interested in perhaps investing in this sort of thing. You really have to be careful, all right? On eBay, you're going to see a lot of stuff like this. It says it's sealed. There's no indication of what is included. There were two versions of this. There was one that contained 1994 playoff teams, and I believe one that contained 1995 playoff teams. And I don't think that one is rarer or, more common or whatever than the other. As far as collecting is concerned, it's not worth much. So they wanted $80. The person who bought this paid less. Good. Don't pay $80, but I mean, don't pay 50, right? It's just not worth it. I'll tell you here, rare original 1996 APBA Pro Baseball Strategy game. This one sold for $65. And again, there's no way for you to tell. You can't even tell looking, at least at the picture here at the back of the box, which season this is supposed to represent. It will say copyright 1995 on the bottom, which means this is probably the one that has the 94 teams, right? But I mean, you don't know. And here it'll say 1996. And rare vintage board game. It's not rare. Trust me, it's not rare. And you can see there, there are the smaller boards on the top right. I don't know, maybe you're a fan of that. I never was a fan of that at all. I thought that was kind of a crazy, crazy gimmick. Here's another version of the exact same thing. And this has copyright 1996 APBA, so this probably has the 95 playoff teams, right? If you like the 95 Indians, 95 Braves, there you go. $50. And that's probably about where I would say, just ballpark, I would pay for a sealed copy of this. If it's not sealed, I wouldn't even pay that. So what do you get inside it? Well, we'll look at some examples. This one was a best offer. They wanted $50. Fortunately, the person didn't pay that because it's incomplete. So it's supposed to come with 8 teams, right? This one comes with 2 teams and a Hall of Famer team. It is possible that APBA occasionally mixed things up. I don't know. But, we're looking here, Hall of Famer Group 8. I mean, so the Hall of Fame set was originally supposed to be a set that came out again after the death of J. Richard Seitz. It was a sort of set that he probably would have never agreed to. It was supposed to be a set that was all going to be together, right? You're going to buy every player that was ever in the Hall of Fame all at once, right? That was the original idea behind it. And then APBA started putting the cards into various products for whatever reason, mostly because the set just didn't sell. there were a lot of problems with the APBA game company back then, and I mean, we'll talk about that later on. In fact, there are a lot of problems with the company now, but whatever. But check out the teams that this includes, right? Yeah, the Atlanta Braves from 1994, I believe, and the Chicago White Sox from 1994. So that's kind of a weird selection of teams to come with. I don't understand why. This, by the way, does not mean that this is unopened. This is just, they could have put the dice and the little red thing back in. I don't know. Be careful with stuff like this, right? Because this is like dime a dozen. There's a lot of this stuff out there, right? And then here at the very end, I just chose this one. This is a current auction. Chose this because this does show you the limited certificate of authenticity. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not 15,000. This version is a limited edition of 12,000. Regardless, 12,000 is a huge, huge number for this. Like if APBA actually sold all 12,000 copies of this game, the company would have had absolutely no financial problems. It would never have been taken over by MMI, and it wouldn't have gone down with the MMI bankruptcy, right? So, yeah, there I said it. APBA's first bankruptcy, as some of us remember. At least this one does come with the full 94 version of playoff teams instead of 2 teams and some random Hall of Fame group. You can even see the color-coded boards here, and you can see the so-called broadcast, I think they call it the broadcast blast boards. I don't know. I mean, if you want to read that or not, I don't think that these really add that much as far as I'm concerned. I don't know. I mean, they should have just kept the boards the same, in my personal opinion. Then again, I'm kind of a grumpy guy, so what do I know? But anyway, that's a little bit of an explanation of kind of what this product is and where it comes from. You can find, if you look around, like actual complete sets, including a full season set of cards with this box. That is something I would recommend looking into a little bit more, because the season set will usually be worth more than the box and the boards. The truth is that these days, when you follow this market, you'll notice that old sets, like the old big boxes with the original boards, if they're in good shape and are still usable, or especially if they're in really nice shape, that will fetch quite a bit of money. People are interested in that. But yeah, that board set they came out with after J. Richard Seitz's death, not so much. I mean, it's nice these days because when you buy the boards, it comes in that little, the little like flip book type thing with like the perforated edges and all that stuff, so that you can read it like a book instead of flipping boards around. It's okay. Personally, though, again, as a traditionalist, I really prefer the original boards. They're much faster. It's much easier. You don't have to worry about like part of the result being cut off by like the little hole or whatever. So that's my personal opinion on the subject. I think that's the reason why the old boards tend to fetch somewhat of a premium. If APBA were to go back to that one day, I don't think that they would have boards quite the same size. And one thing to remember, though, if you're in it for like the long run, and if you're serious about, okay, yeah, we want to try to get some APBA cards and APBA stuff and think about long-term money, remember that most people who played APBA end up coming back to it later on in life, right? We'll talk about this later, but there's a phenomenon in the sports sim world where people who are usually like around my age, around 40 or so, will end up experimenting a little bit more as they get back into baseball sims. They'll do a lot more computer-based stuff. Maybe they'll play with games that are more complicated. But then generally, once you hit like the 60s, mid-60s or so, you start thinking, I want to do something more simple. And that's where the love of really simple games like the APBA basic game or the Strat-O-Matic basic game comes back. And that's where you will see people start to try to reacquire sets and games that they had in the past and bring them back and try to do a project. If somebody's going to do that, especially with APBA, they need to be able to see and read the boards. So they're not going to go for some little book or for some little thing, even if it fits better on the kitchen table. They're going to want to go for the old boards, the large boards that are a lot easier on the eyes and that are a lot easier to flip through. So that's another thing to keep in mind, just in case you actually do want to dabble in this world. Again, as I think I've said before, I would recommend reconsidering. In terms of APBA especially, most of these cards have not appreciated well over time. I was just looking at an original 1951 season set that sold for less than $5,000 on eBay. I mean, that seems crazy to me considering how rare it is, but that's kind of what's happened to it. If you're really into like, okay, I want to collect, some sort of simulation game from the past for the purpose of potentially making money, you need to look a little bit more towards Strat-O-Matic. Those are the cards that have actually held their value over time. APBA is really, really hit or miss. It does not have a great track record for holding its value. I mean, I guess unless you have the original 1950 season, which would be incredible. But even then, you have to find a buyer, right? And people will say this is amazing and it belongs in a museum, but will anybody on the private market who could buy it actually want to buy it? I mean, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Anyway, there you have it. Hope you have a good day. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.